Welcome back to the Act 2 podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, Act 2 is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter, of which this podcast is just one of our many initiatives. So thank you for joining us here. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming announcements like this one I'm about to do. How on November 30th, we will be hosting our first ever open Act 2 event, the first of many. So save the date and keep listening. Follow us on our socials at ActTwoWriters for more details to come. But we're very excited.
It's going to be in Hollywood. No Glendale trips for me.
No. Listen, LA is hard.
No, I understand. I didn't even choose the location, by the way, just for the record.
No, I thought I would be kind to you and to Dave, friend of the podcast. Speaking of, we have a very special guest today, our favorite guest.
Aww.
The world may know him as the screenwriter behind the Aaron Paul movie Welcome Home, but listeners know him as Dave, friend of the podcast. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you guys for having me back. Yes, I'm very honored to be a friend of the podcast, and I would also like to say that I am an avid listener of the podcast. Always listening. You guys are the best. Yeah.
Is it because we'd hurt you if you didn't listen?
No. I mean, maybe a little bit subconsciously, but I think I enjoy listening for the most part.
For the most part.
For the most part.
Do you have notes, Dave?
No, I remember listening to the Halloween episode last year, and I definitely had notes on something that you guys were talking about. I don't even remember it now, but so that's why I was very eager to come on for this year's Halloween episode.
We're rectifying it.
Yes.
I feel like every Halloween we need Dave to come on because he is our favorite horror writer.
Yeah.
And
it's
a natural
I'm
fit.
very honored, and I definitely do not deserve that title, but I appreciate it. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, we're doing a special episode. Halloween is here. Dave is on. We're talking stuff.
It's the best. It feels like fall is here now. Like this is the official start of fall.
Yes.
Dave
this
starts
moment.
fall.
If only it wasn't like 85 degrees outside.
No, it's cold now. It's cold. I'm wearing a sweater
I see that. Yeah.
in the valley.
Yeah.
Like, when does that happen? Only right now in fall.
Are we doing a This Week in Writing?
Let's do it. Let's knock it out so we can get into our topic.
Okay.
This week in writing.
This Week in Writing.
This Week in Writing.
I read the White Lotus pilot. And as I was reading it, I realized how it felt a little different than the actual execution of the TV show, The White Lotus. And it just made me think about the difference between, you're writing this general idea to what it ends up being. For instance, the execution and the final product was much more, I don't want to say polished. That's not the right word because the pilot was really good. But it just felt much more elevated in kind of this Hawaiian world, I guess. It's I'm actually not doing a great job articulating this, but it just got me thinking about how there's such a big discrepancy. And it also got me thinking of, you go in after you watch something, and I read the pilot, it's like you have a lens on and you can't unsee and unread the White Lotus. So now I know what they were going for. But had I just read that pilot, I think I would have probably had a different version of what the White Lotus was.
You're saying the final product is more elevated than the script itself?
Elevated, probably the wrong word. There's more of a polish to the HBO show.
Interesting. Because he wrote it and directed it, right?
Right.
So like he knew what it was going to be. And he wrote it because the studios were like, hey, it's pandemic and we need something small, quick, and cheap. And he like happened to be on vacation in Hawaii, right? And he was like, okay, I'll write something real quick. That's the myth behind how he wrote it.
Well, what's interesting about that myth is that they don't explicitly say Hawaii in the pilot. It's basically this islandy area. There's mountains, there's an ocean, and it's very kind of open-ended of where this could take place.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
that's all.
Yeah, I want to read the pilot. Thank you for sending it to me. Worth reading.
Yeah, thanks for reading it. But it is worth checking out.
Can you send
if
it
anyone...
to me too, please?
Fine. I can.
Thank you. I feel left out.
That's all. My This Week in Writing is the difference between the final product and the script. And everyone always says, watch something while reading the pilot. And I think this is a reminder to do that because that's all.
Interesting.
Okay.
All right, I have a This Week in Writing. I started watching The Fall of the House of Usher by Mike Flanagan.
Yes.
I'm on episode 2. I finished episode 2. And per usual, I'm just so inspired by it. I know Dave's watched the whole thing.
I
right?
have finished it this weekend.
It's so good, Dave. The This Week in Writing part of it to me is like how kind of simple it is in a way, right? Where he takes these short stories of Edgar Allan Poe. And I feel like everything Mike Flanagan does is about family in some way.
For
so
sure.
it's about family. So he creates this family and then he wraps these short stories around it. So the Fall of the House of Usher short story is like the basic premise or like way in to what the show is about. And then he creates this family, and each episode, it seems like, I'm only on 2, but it seems like each episode is about one of the children within this family, and it is attached to a different short story. The second episode was The Mask of the Red Death, and that was a short story that Edgar Allan Poe wrote, and then it's based on that idea, but it's totally new. It's totally fresh. It's totally organic to who the character is that he created and the themes of family that he wants to bring out, and it's just so genius. So simple and so genius, and that's all I wanted to say.
I definitely second that.
I need to watch a show.
It is so good. And the ways that, he and they, the whole writing staff, just weave in the Edgar Allan Poe stories are incredible.
Yeah. Highly recommend it if you're interested in adaptation or trying to find inspiration for how to sort of give your story a backbone in a series or anything. Like they do a really, really great job at finding IP that is enough to give them sort of a foundation to then do whatever they want and tell the story that they actually want to tell. And so it's just a really great weaving of all of that. Highly recommend.
What was sort of interesting too as a viewing experience with that is I watched it with my wife, Joanna, who's also a huge Mike Flanagan fan. We're Mike Flanagan stans, the both of us. But she is not as intimately familiar with the works of Edgar Allan Poe. And so, like, I felt through a lot of it, like I kind of had an idea where the episodes were going, right? Because I knew what stories they were using for each episode, and I know how those stories end up. And so I feel like it was probably just a slightly different viewing experience for me versus my wife.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. Because in the second episode, as soon as Chick shows up at the party, I'm like, oh, that's Death. And whereas Paul was like, who is she? Is she the girlfriend of so-and-so? Like, he starts trying to guess who she is. And I'm just like,
Cool.
Everyone's going to die.
Nice little spoiler. Great. Thanks, Tasha. Awesome. All right, Tasha, what are we talking about today?
First off, I wanted to say there's construction going on, so if you hear it, I'm sorry. Second thing I want to say is welcome to our Halloween episode. Today we are talking about our top 5 favorite Halloween movies, and we're breaking down what makes them our favorites, what we can learn.
Just to clarify, horror movies, not Halloween the franchise.
That's correct. Horror movies.
Because there's more than enough Halloween the franchise movies to have a top 5.
That is so true. We're not just talking about the franchise Halloween. Horror movies in general. And they can be any kind of genre of horror. Horror comedy, sci-fi horror, whatever you feel is a horror movie. And we're going to talk about, what we can learn as writers from the way they're constructed, types of scares they have, the character stories, why, breaking down really the essence of why they are our favorite horror movies. So Dave, do you want to start? Do you want to start with your number 5 pick?
Sure.
Do you want to just go?
So we're going top 5 to 1.
5 to 1.
Okay.
Yeah, and these are my top 5 personal favorites. So it's not, my like objective, greatest of all time list. A lot of this has to do with the time in my life when I saw it and, nostalgia and all that. These are just the ones that hold a special, dear place in my heart.
I love it.
So I also had to do a lot of soul searching with this list because
Yeah.
like I feel like I know, the general grouping of my favorite horror movies, but I mean, to put them in some sort of numerical order, and then to decide what like cracks number 5. Like I feel like I have
Yeah.
an endless amount of honorable mentions.
Yeah, same.
But what I ended up going with for number 5 is The Strangers, written and
Good call.
directed by Brian Bertino, starring Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman. Came out in 2008. And this movie, I think, it's so terrifying in its simplicity, which really, so back up a little bit. The story is essentially we're following this couple who is clearly in crisis in their relationship. When we meet them, they're arriving at Scott Speedman's character's, his like family country home in the middle of the night. They just got back from a wedding, and they're clearly on the verge of breaking up. And as they're sort of trying to talk through their issues and dealing with, the end of their relationship, there's a knock on the door, and it's like 3-4 in the morning. And they're like, who can that possibly be? And they go to answer the door, and it's just a girl out there standing in the shadows, and she asks, is Tamra home? And they're like, no, there's no Tamra here. And they kind of send her on her way. And then like a few minutes later, she comes back and knocks again and asks the same question. And then from there, it basically just devolves into these 3 masked strangers just terrifying this couple and, playing a game of cat and mouse with them, with their ultimate goal obviously being to murder them. And so, like I said, it's so scary in how simple it is, because and this is not a spoiler because I'm pretty sure this was in the trailer way back when, but like at one point, Liv Tyler's character asks, why are you doing this? And the answer is because you were home. And so it's this idea of random violence and a random home invasion for no reason that could strike anybody.
Yeah. For that reason, I can't watch it, particularly since I've like moved into a house. I think in an apartment, it was different. It felt like, what are the odds that someone would like knock on my door out of all of them? But now, like, Paul and I are still scared living in a house. It's terrifying. So I can't bring myself to watch it because that horror is too true, it feels like.
Yeah, and I feel like it totally plays to that too. Like, because you see the neighboring houses, but they're all dark, and you never really see anybody. It's like that. Like, it looks like a very rural, semi-suburban area where the house is. But yeah, it's just all that like wide open space and trees, and it's dark.
I was going to say, there's a moment in that movie, which also I thought was, I remember this, like, I don't remember much of the movie except for when they hid in the closet with a shotgun, and they were like, we're just going to shoot these motherfuckers. And I remember watching being like, this is the first time in any horror movie they're doing exactly what someone should be doing.
Yes.
And then still it gets figured out. I forgot like how they get out of it, but
the plan doesn't work out, but you're right. That's like, that is exactly what I would do. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You're like, well, where do we go? We have a shotgun. Let's just go hide in the closet.
Exactly. And it backfires terrifically. But yeah, and I think a lot of it too, it cracking my top 5 has to do with, like I said, sort of the time in my life. It played a large role in my early screenwriting, because it came out in 2008. So I was a junior in college, and I did not study film. I was a journalism major, but I, at this point, knew I was going to be a journalist and was getting more into film and was sort of starting to dabble with screenwriting. And this movie, for whatever reason, like it just had such a huge effect on me of like, this is what I want to do. Like, I want to make movies like this. And I feel like it was one of the first professional screenplays that I sought out to read as research. And there is kind of a cool, I mean, I don't know how true it is or how much myth it is. I also didn't look it up before coming on here, so I may be misremembering. But there's a cool story behind it where Brian Bertino wrote the script as a spec script and, got it to producers. Producers got it to buyers. They loved the script. And at some point in the development process, they asked him, like, hey, you want to direct this? And he had never directed anything before, and he had to like buy how to direct books and stuff. And so
Holy cow.
I feel like that story also at that, the age that I was, it was very much like, oh, like maybe you could do this. in like in a good, inspiring way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I cracked my top 5. It holds a special place in my heart.
I love that reason.
See, this is why Dave's on the podcast. That breakdown right there already is, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be.
You want to go next, Josh?
Yeah, I got this. I'll go. I got this. I'm moving on. All right. My number 5 is the movie Jaws.
Hell yes.
But it's a little controversial. Like, and by the way, what Dave said, I agree with. This is just, these aren't like the greatest movies of all time. These are just movies that have affected me. And to me, I look at Jaws as somewhat of a monster movie. And I don't really think I need to get into the premise of Jaws. I'm pretty sure we all know it by now. I mean, the things about it that scared me then still scare me to this day. Like when you're in the ocean and you can't really see your legs, you're like, wait a minute. Like, is a shark going to come? Am I dead? And when you're at that sea level in your fate, you just think you're going to see like a fin coming. This movie scared the hell out of me. I should have said that it's obviously it's directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Peter Benchley and Carl Gottlieb. And Peter Benchley, I think is his name. He also wrote the novel, which was interesting. I actually forgot it was based off of a novel.
I read the novel when I was a kid. I was obsessed with Jaws when I was a kid. It was really good.
Is the movie better? Like, do you prefer one or the other?
I mean, I read the book when I was like 12. So
okay,
we're talking about 25 years ago at this point. But the movie is one of my favorite movies of all time for sure. I did not include it on my list because I do consider it a horror movie, but I not like a Halloween horror movie. But otherwise,
that's interesting. Yeah, sure.
But so I specifically tailored to this podcast, but it's hands down one of my favorite.
My bad.
Ever. No, I'm not.
No, this is perfect Josh list already.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you put it on because it needs to be recognized.
Yes.
And obviously, this has been talked about a lot, but without seeing the shark, listen, I'm not going to get into like the element of surprise and mystery and like you use your imagination, but that is a big part of it. And again, I didn't think of this as a monster movie until years and years ago. Someone was like, "Yeah, Jaws is kind of like a monster movie," and I was like, you know what? It is. Like if this was a haunted house and Jaws was a ghost, like there's some parallels to it, which I think is really interesting. So freaking Jaws scared the hell out of me, and I don't think it's scary now to anyone who would see it for the first time that's over a certain age. But when you see that as a kid,
really, you don't think it would be?
I think the shark might not look real to like kids.
To kids, sure. I mean, I had the same experience. I watched it too young. I think my brother was babysitting me, and he's like, "We're gonna do this."
Yeah.
And it ruined me. I just went to Hawaii, and we like went on this boat tour, and they're like, "Okay, everyone can jump in," and like this dude jumped in, like no cares in the world, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna do it just because I have to do it," and then I immediately swam back to the boat and got back in, and I can't bring myself. I'm fucking 42 or something like that, so. Yeah, horror movie for sure.
All right, well, that's my number 5. Again, wasn't in the, like, I didn't describe it like Dave, but Tasha, you're up.
Okay, also similar to what Dave is saying, I feel like if you ask me next year what my top 5 movies are going to be, my like top 3 will stay the same, but my 4 and 5 spots might shift. So my number 5 is High Tension.
Oh.
It's this French slasher film directed by Alexander Aja, written by Gregory Levasseur. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. And Aja also took a pass as well. It was released in 2003. And the basic premise is these 2 female friends and students go to one of the girls' secluded farmhouse, like family farmhouse, to study together. And shortly after they arrive, the house is invaded by a serial killer who starts taking out the family and also trying to kill the girls. And very early on in Act 1, you start to kind of get the sense that one of the girls loves the other. And it's this like unrequited love. She hasn't really spoken it yet, and she really wants to. And so when the movie really kicks off and people are starting to die, like you have fallen in love with these women already. And I think that to me becomes sort of the best lesson of the movie, is that you really open it with caring about them. And I think a lot of slasher films that are like less than High Tension kind of just like, you have characters at the top, right? You have like the jock and the pretty one and whatever. You have all these tropes, but you don't really get to care about them and really know who they are and care that their objectives are achieved. Like, I really want this couple to get together, right? Like, there's something sweet about that. And so then I'm now really rooting for these women to get through it. And I don't want to give anything away because I think the movie watching experience is a part of what makes this movie so great. I think it's called High Tension for a reason. I remember it being it was like one of the most tense movies I have ever watched, I think, just in the way it's directed. And again, because you care about the characters so much, you're just so invested in every single moment. Yeah, I guess that's my number 5.
I've never seen this movie.
That's a great one.
So good.
Yeah. I haven't seen it since I think I was in college, but I remember I really enjoyed it. And it's like super gory too, right?
It's super gory. The kills are really great.
Yeah.
But what makes the movie is like the third act. What happens in the third act is so...
Yeah.
It like transforms everything you've seen before. And I love movies like that. It completely turns it on its head in a really, really cool way. So go see it if you haven't already. It's a fantastic horror movie.
You know, real quickly, I just have to say, if AI was listening to all of these episodes and then they had us on there and AI was going to predict what our 5th like favorite horror movie was, I feel like these match our personalities very, very well. Like Tasha goes like some French movie, Dave's on The Strangers, I'm on some Spielberg shit. All right, let's go. Dave,
you saying we're predictable?
I mean, listen, I'm not saying that, but I'm curious for number 4.
My number 4 is The Conjuring, which is...
Whoa.
Why is it so low, Dave?
I'm really surprised. Oh my God.
You're going to have to hear the rest of my list to find out why.
Okay.
Released in 2013, written by Chad and Carrie Hayes, and directed by the great James Wan. And I mean, this, I think, was maybe the scariest theater experience of my life.
Yeah.
I remember I saw this at the Vista, which for those who are not in Los Angeles or have never been to the Vista is this sort of big, old feeling theater that has like Egyptian like statues and stuff on the walls that are lit kind of like creep. It's like a very cool, vibey feeling theater. And then, I mean, the movie itself is just so scary. Like the sense of dread and tension is so high that I remember at one point in the second act, like my stomach hurt because I was so tense, I think.
Amazing.
And yeah, it's just I also have a personal connection to it because it's obviously the movie follows Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are real life ghost hunters and demonologists. And it's basically, the movie is about, they take on a case of this haunted farmhouse in Rhode Island where a family is being terrorized by the ghost of a witch. And as a teenager, I grew up in Connecticut, which is where Ed and Lorraine Warren are from and where they worked. And so as a teenager, I saw Ed and Lorraine speak twice. So I had sort of a personal connection to it. And then I just feel like in this movie, like the filmmaking is just so incredible from a technical perspective. Like the camera moves and just, I feel like James Wan is just flexing all over the place. And I feel like this also, I mean, obviously this started a universe, a cinematic universe, the Conjuring verse, where you have Annabelle and the Nun and all these, a few other Conjuring movies. By the way, little shout out to The Conjuring 2, which is equally as fantastic. I feel like The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 are basically the Godfather Part 1 and Part 2 of haunted house movies in my mind. That's a good
way to put that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, it's amazing characters. You care about the family. You care about Ed and Lorraine's marriage. And then it's just got incredibly, really well built, creative scare set pieces. Like there's the whole hide and seek clapping game, which I think is pretty famous at this point, which is just genius. And I remember there's a scene where the two girls, the two sisters in the family, are in the bedroom, and the bedroom door is like open halfway, and so there's just behind the door is a shadow because it's, the lights are off. It's a dark room. And the younger sister like gets up and says that she sees something standing in the shadows. And the older sister's like, there's nothing there. She gets up, she walks over, she's standing in the shadows, and the little girl's like, it's standing right behind you. And you literally see nothing. And I have like never been so scared in my life because I feel like just by that point they have ratcheted up the tension and the dread so well that like the very idea of seeing whatever is standing in the shadows was like the scariest thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super well said.
To go back to, myths behind movies, I've heard that because the movie's rated R, and I've heard that, during post-production, they really, really wanted a PG-13, and they kept resubmitting cuts to the MPA, and eventually the MPA came back to them and was just like, there's nothing that you guys can like take out of the movie to make it PG-13 because the tone is just too scary.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so
I remember, I don't know if you do, Dave, if I was in, I forget when did it come out again?
2013.
2013. So I was in Los Angeles at the time. I remember that after it came out, it was so scary that theaters started putting pieces of paper on the doors of theaters before you go in that say like, warning, if you're going to see The Conjuring, like, be prepared, this is a really scary movie, and that people have been like known to, there have been like heart attacks or something
really?
from
I don't think
people
I knew
who
that.
have been. Yes, there were these posters that like AMC put on the doors, and I was like,
Wow.
I can't see this movie. I can't, because I kind of hate horror movies but love them at the same time because I have such a vivid imagination. They really affect me in my waking life as much as they do in just watching it. I will take these movies with me constantly, and it's often too much. So I was like, I can't see this movie in theaters, and then it changed my life. But yeah, that's how scary it was when it came out. It's insane.
Yeah, not surprising.
Dave touched on this, but I do think this is like a masterclass in like setups and payoffs in horror films, the hide and seek game, everything that you just touched on. But I remember watching it being like, oh my God. And when you watch something, you're like, that's going to come back and scare me. Like they I feel like do that in such a, it's a masterful way. I have a feeling it might be on our list, Tasha, but so I won't go further into it. But
Yeah.
my number 4, the movie Saw, the original Saw, obviously by James Wan and written by Lee Winnell. Listen, I feel like because of, I hate torture porn. I hate it. I hate movies. I can't watch it. I won't even watch trailers for the new Saw movies. But I feel like when I first saw Saw, it scared me so much because, well, number one, the bad guy wins at the end. I think it's a brilliant script. I feel like the original Saw kind of gets lost in what it has become, but I feel like it's really smart. And also, it really touches on the decisions that people make in their lives and the mistakes that they've made. And like Jigsaw was scary as hell. And then, I don't know, the original Saw just really messed me up. And just kind of being left in a room at the end to die always just stuck with me. And honestly, I remember thinking to myself, it's like they did such a good job of justifying Jigsaw's reasoning. Like he was like, well, if you didn't have that affair on your wife, maybe you wouldn't be in this room. And you're like, oh shit, why did that guy have the affair? You're like, you think that for like a split second. So I actually think the first Saw is brilliant. It's definitely very hard to watch. Nothing, I don't remember watching any kind of like torture porn. I hate, that's like the wrong term to use, but
it's so smart though. Like
it's so smart. That's
Saw
the thing.
is so smart and so character based, like you were just saying.
Yeah,
which I think differentiates it from movies that would be considered straight torture porn.
So I've never seen Saw.
Really?
Because I tend to not go to torture porny type movies. But is it different than the other Saws? Does it like set this like really character based stage and then the rest just kind of take the torture porn to a whole new level and that's just what it's become? Or is it the same as others? This one just happens to be better written.
No, I think it's not as, I feel like after the original Saw, it was kind of like, oh my God, let's see what kind of booby traps we can put on people's faces and scare the audience into being like, no way will this ever happen. But the first one I think is very character based, very smart. Of course, there are some things in it that you're like, I can't unsee what I just saw. It's pretty good. You should check it out.
I would not classify the first one as torture porn.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
And there's also just like such a brilliant twist. That's such a memorable ending.
Oh, okay.
Okay, number 4, go.
Okay, number 4, The Thing. Directed by John Carpenter, written by Bill Lancaster, starring, of course, Kurt Russell. Based on a 1938 novella, Who Goes There, written by John Campbell Jr.
I don't think I knew that.
This movie came out in 1982. I went down a little rabbit hole. Is it okay if I take you down my rabbit hole with me?
Please.
Just a little bit? Okay, the basic plot of this movie is there are a group of American researchers in Antarctica who encounter extraterrestrial life that starts to assimilate and imitate the other people in the research facility. The group becomes overcome by paranoia, and they start realizing they can no longer trust each other because any of them could be the thing, and that's what the movie is about. Now, I didn't see this movie until I was working at Universal in like 2009, 2010, because my boss at the time was the executive on the sequel to The Thing that came out in 2011. So I needed to, of course, understand why the original worked, why it was so good, to better understand how to give notes on this sequel and how the sequel needed to tick, right? And I think it's just as a side note important when doing a sequel to understand why the first movie is so good and why people love it, so you can capture that essence, right? And this was one of those movies to me where, yes, it's a horror movie. It's very suspenseful. There are amazing and gruesome kills. But really at the heart of it, it's a human survival story. How we either break down or we persevere in these really extremely difficult situations. Because not only is there an alien attacking us, but we're in the middle of nowhere in Antarctica. You can't be more isolated. So I love horror movies like this just generally, as you can probably tell from the list, where horror just kind of is the backdrop or like the gift wrap to telling a story about, like, insert human drama here, right? In this case, it's about human paranoia and trust. But a little history about this. It was first adapted in 1951 in a kind of like post-Hiroshima era. And thematically at the time, because of that, it was about how scientists can go too far. So their obsession with science leads them to bring this really dangerous ET back to their base that ends up killing everyone. But in that adaptation, they made the alien more kind of like just sentient vegetation. Someone called it like a super carrot, basically, in the movie. It had no personality. To hammer home this theme, this kind of post-Hiroshima theme, the heroes of the movie who finally kill the thing are just like sensible soldiers and like really rational scientists, rather than the kind of over-obsessive scientists, the kind of Oppenheimers in the world. Now, the 1982 Thing went through a ton of development hell, which I always find really interesting about these movies that we think are iconic now, that it went through all the same problems that we all go through today. So they had a lot of different writers and directors who had wildly different ideas on how to adapt this short story, as you can imagine. Until finally they decided, okay, let's do a more faithful interpretation of the short story, which is that the life form or the ET can replicate whatever life form it touches. But interestingly, at the time, the rights to the short story were actually owned by two screenwriters, Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins, just because they were super fans of the original movie back in the day. And they were just like mid-level writers. I think one of them is an author now. He's just gotten out of the business. So Universal had to approach them to make the movie, and they passed on it. They didn't want to do it. So now Universal was open to find any writer they wanted. And they at first went to John Carpenter, who at the time was an indie director. He didn't really have much going on. So they ultimately decided to go with someone who was like a safer bet. He had just done Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They already had a contract with him. So they went with Tobe Hooper and his writing partner, Kim Henkel. And so they started working on the adaptation. They finished a draft, and Universal did not like it. So the project went back to being an OWA. So they invited writers to just come in. We got this property, guys. We don't know what to do with it. Like, let's hear your pitches on how to make it better. But they liked none of the pitches. They hated it. So not knowing what to do with this, they just put it on a shelf. Then cut to 1979, Ridley Scott comes out with Alien, which is this, of course, incredible sci-fi horror movie that almost made my list and probably will next year, that showed that this genre could work, that it could work to great success. So Universal decided to revitalize this movie. And now, at this point, in 1978, John Carpenter had done Halloween. So they got to go back to John Carpenter, and they trusted him this time. They gave him a budget of $15 million, 1.5 of which was used solely on the creature effects. And then this movie came out and was like critically massacred. It was called instant junk. People hated how repulsive the Thing special effects were. They thought, this is my favorite part, they thought the characters were terrible and one-dimensional. But then the movie went to home video, went to television, which we don't get to have this phase anymore. But during that phase, this movie had a huge resurgence and, of course, is now considered one of the best sci-fi movies ever made. And I think it's hilarious that they hated the characters, because that's what I love about this movie is it's the character story that's told. So that's my long-winded sort of rabbit hole that I went through.
That's beautiful.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah, it's very relevant. Like, shit never changes. Excuse my language.
It never changes. Yeah, these iconic movies were made the same way that our sausage is made.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It's like a little bit of a blind spot for me. I've seen it, but not in like a very, very long time, and I don't remember it as well as I should. I need to rewatch it.
It's so good. Please do. Okay.
Dave?
All right. So we're on to number 3. My number 3 is Rosemary's Baby, which came out in 1968, written and directed by Roman Polanski.
I was wondering when this was going to be on your list.
Me
like,
too,
what
actually.
level? I knew it was going to be on there, but where?
It was almost number 2. It was almost number 2, and it slid to number 3. It's based on a novel by Ira Levin, and I mean, just the general. I mean, it's such a classic, but the general plot is this couple, Rosemary and Guy Woodhouse. They live in this beautiful luxury apartment building in New York City that they just moved into. And they, Rosemary becomes pregnant. They're trying to start a family. And there's also this older couple that lives next door to them that sort of become more and more nosy and involved in the pregnancy as it progresses. And it essentially just, becomes this incredible spiral down a rabbit hole of paranoia as Rosemary begins to think that there's something wrong with the baby, and that the older couple next door are trying to harm the baby in some way. And everybody around her are, they're essentially gaslighting her and telling her that she's crazy. And so, yeah, I mean, this is just, it's an incredible mixture of 2 subgenres that I love so much, which are, paranoid domestic thrillers and occult horror. And you guys know that most of the success that I've had as a screenwriter has come with like domestic thrillers that are, about a couple going through something, and then some outside force comes in and terrorizes them and, threatens their relationship. And so this is very much that. And then it also has a cult horror. And I have a fascination with cults and the occult. So it's a world that I love. It is I think it's a perfectly crafted mystery. And it taught me so much about structuring a horror mystery as far as setups and payoffs. There are so many seemingly innocuous things that come in the first act that then come back in, either the later second act or the third act as much more nefarious than you first thought they were. The building up of clues is incredible. Yeah, it's funny. The first time that I ever saw it, I was in college, and I think that I expected it to be this really like intense horror movie, and I didn't like it because that's not really what it is. And then I rewatched it a few years later as research for a script that I was working on, and when I rewatched it and saw it the second time, I was like, this is a perfect movie.
I love
that.
I
feel like you have to go into it with certain expectations. It's not a modern, it's not even like a Conjuring, which Conjuring I feel like has a very slow burn in today's sort of horror age. Like the whole movie is kind of a slow burn, but it's so creepy and yeah, like I feel like you watch it going in with what Dave is saying, like the little clues that they lay, the seeds along the way that end up paying off, and how do you do that in your own stuff?
Right. Yeah, it's a masterclass.
I love it.
Number 3, The Ring.
It's got to be on someone's list,
not
right?
The original Ring. The Ring, directed by Gore Verbinski, which I had no idea Gore Verbinski directed this movie until I just looked it up for this podcast. He did like Pirates of the Caribbean. Written by Aaron Kruger and based off of the Japanese novel and the Japanese film. Listen, this is what I love in horror films. This is what, like, something that The Ring, for me, what scared me is when something kind of gets like passed on to you, and it's like, could be a relic, could be the videotape. If anyone doesn't know, the premise of The Ring is you watch a movie, someone gives you this movie, you watch it, and after 7 days, like, this girl crawls out of the TV and then comes to kill you, basically, unless you pass off the tape to somebody else. I love that. Like, I love that premise. I think it's kind of been replicated, and maybe it was done before that, but for me, this movie scared the hell out of me because of the visuals of it. I actually think it also does some good character work. Naomi Watts is in it. I think she was like awesome in it. And Logan Roy's in it. He's great in it. And I love The Ring. That movie really wrecked me for a really long time. And I thought for a while someone was going to crawl out of my TV screen, just like in the middle of the night when it got like fuzzy.
That movie wrecked me too. I remember,
right?
I still remember seeing it in theaters. I can't remember if I was in middle school or high school, but I remember seeing it in theaters, and I think like a couple friends and I were having like a sleepover, and we went and saw it, and then went back to one of our houses, and I remember we were all just so scared.
Yeah.
Like, we stayed up like all night because we were so scared.
And, you know, going back to like The Strangers, this idea of come on over to my, like, these strangers just come over to your house and it's because you were home. And I think what The Ring does and what really good horror movies do is when they pick on something that's super relatable. This doesn't happen anymore, but a fuzzy television screen, which used to happen. When that happened after The Ring, I was like, that's it.
Oh, shit.
I'm dead. Here we go. I got to get the hell out of here. Yeah, so The Ring's number 3. It really messed me up for a really long time.
It's also another fantastic example of like building out the mystery in a horror movie. I actually will often rewatch The Ring when I'm working on a project that has like a supernatural mystery where a character's trying to get to the bottom of some dangerous supernatural thing. That, like, because The Ring, I think just again, similar to Rosemary's Baby, the way that the buildup of the clues and the trail that Naomi Watts has to follow. And The Ring does a specifically amazing job of making that very visual. And yeah, that's one. It's not on my list, but that is one that I go back to a lot for research purposes.
I watched that as an adult, so it didn't scare me. Like, if I had watched it when I was younger, I know that would have been one that like stuck with me and really affected me. But what I really love about that movie is that at the end, and the thing that I felt like was so surprising and new and original about it was that it's not like, if I just figure out what this ghost wants, it'll stop hurting people. There's no end to this because it turns out the ghost itself is fucking insane. So the ghost is insane, which is like, I feel like that's totally new. Usually it's the ghost of a person who had gone insane. And so like, it's just sort of almost like an echo of that person. And if you just like fix their problem, they'll go away. That's kind of even the idea of The Conjuring. Like that ghost has a very specific issue, right? And sort of enacting its issue out on people. But this was a ghost that was insane. You can't fix it. You just literally have to pass the tape on. That's the only way that this movie gets solved. I thought that was really cool.
A moral quandary. All right, Tasha.
Okay, number 3, Cabin in the Woods. Directed by Drew Goddard.
It's a fun one.
Written by Goddard and Joss Whedon. It came out in 2011. According to Wikipedia, they wrote the script in 3 days. Look, I don't want to believe it.
No way.
I want to know what kind of prep was involved before they did that, if that's true. The basic story is there's a group of college students who retreat to a remote forest cabin where they just start to die off. They become a victim of a variety of kind of tropey monsters in a lot of horror movies. And then you discover that there's these technicians behind the scenes actually manipulating these different monsters and moments from this underground facility, and they're doing it for a very specific reason, which I won't spoil in case you haven't seen it, but go fucking see it. And to me, this...
I actually don't remember the reason.
Dave.
I don't think I've seen this since I saw it in theaters.
So good.
Yeah.
So this is a good one to have on in the background because it's kind of comedy, so you can just it's an easy watch in a way. But for me, this is kind of a simple one in terms of why I love it. I thought the dialogue was very well written. It was hilarious. It's the Joss Whedon voice. The premise I thought was incredibly brilliant and new. It was something I had never seen before, and that's so hard to do in a horror movie. I think the concept clearly comes from a love of horror. You get all of these like nods to things like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and like just these iconic horror movies and horror deaths. But it was a new take on what that horror could be and why horror exists. And I just thought it was extremely creative, and that's why I loved it.
I remember it was really fun. Yeah, I should rewatch it.
You should rewatch it.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting ending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie.
I remember what happens at the end, I think, but I do not remember the reason behind it.
I think it takes a while to reveal the actual reason of it. Like the technicians are doing it for something, but it's not clear what that something is until like the very, very end.
Right.
It's fun. All right. Number 2, Dave.
My number 2 is actually Tasha, Cabin in the Woods. I feel like was a great lead in to my number 2 because my number 2 is Scream.
Okay.
Yes.
Which, of course, came out in 1996, written by Kevin Williamson and directed by the late, great Wes Craven.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one of the most formative movies of my life. So, as a child, going to Blockbuster every weekend, I was the kid that was like obsessed with the horror section and like all the VHS covers. They would just fascinate me. And just, before I was able to see these movies, like the scary covers of the tapes in the horror section would just utterly fascinate me. And I would be like obsessed with getting to see the movies. So I was 10 when Scream came out. And I feel like, I was now just getting to the age where my parents were starting to allow me to see these movies. And I don't think I saw it right when it came out, but I remember I was obsessed with getting to see it.
Yeah.
And I mean, the script is just brilliant. Like the meta-ness of it, how it plays on cliches and tropes of other horror movies and expectations. And the mystery that it builds of who the killer is, the dialogue, Kevin Williamson's dialogue is always pretty fantastic. The dialogue of these high school students is just like a little bit like heightened. Like they all sound like very clever and smart, but it's so entertaining. It's got my favorite opening scene of any horror movie ever.
That's fair.
Of course, the Drew Barrymore scene, which goes on for it's like a 10-minute scene. It is like a full set piece, and it is terrifying. Like,
I think
to
that's
this
like
day.
a 20-minute. I think
It
that's
might
almost
be.
like a first act. I've looked back at that.
Can I ask, do you remember in the script? You probably don't. I'm sorry, but was it written to be that long?
That I don't know.
I believe it. I read it. I read the script like not long ago, and I think it was. I think it was like a 22 page opening.
Wow.
And it's got like the dialogue is so clever, even like the little details of in that scene where they're, the killer calls and she's on the phone with him and they're talking about their favorite horror movies, and A Nightmare on Elm Street comes up, which of course Wes Craven directed the original Nightmare on Elm Street. And there's a line that I think the killer says like, oh, like that one's scary. And Drew Barrymore goes like, well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's like, it's that detailed. So the opening is incredible. And then like Matthew Lillard, I think, gives one of the all-time swing for the fences performance performances in the third act of a movie ever. Like that, the last 20-25 minutes of the movie is just so rewatchable, and I credit Matthew Lillard a lot with that. And then it's one of the most rewatchable movies for me. It's, like I said, one of the most formative movies of my life. And I also think that the Scream movies are, in my opinion, probably the best horror franchise ever.
Wow.
I was going to ask if you feel like any of the sequels live up to it or deteriorate the first.
I actually don't really think that there's a bad Scream movie. Like, I love Scream 2. Scream 3 would be my personal least favorite. I think that's the weakest. But then Scream 4 is a blast. And then I think that they've brought, with Scream 5 and Scream 6 these last couple of years, I think they've sort of brought a new generation. But I still have a ton of fun going to see them. And I'm a sucker for nostalgia, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can't comment on how much nostalgia plays in on that. But Josh, we saw the last one together.
Yeah.
I remember you were a little shaken coming out of that one.
Oh my God, we did.
Yeah.
I was super messed up after that. Oh, that's right. I saw that by myself, and Dave was a few rows ahead with Joanna.
Yeah.
And,
Did you only realize that at the end?
no, I think we were messaging, and I was like, I have nothing to do or something. And then you were like, we're
I think
going
Joanna
to
and I were going to see it. And yeah, like I basically talked Josh into come in to see it like 20 minutes before the movie.
I just ran over there real quickly. But yeah, the original Scream's amazing. The last Scream, this part 6 or whatever, definitely a little violent. In the sense that like some of the kills were just, and like a head thuds off the ground or something like that. I'm just too old now. Now it just messes me up. I'm like, oh my God. But nothing could be matched for the original Scream.
Yeah, it's utter classic.
Okay, this is a wild one for me. The original Candyman.
Oh,
yes.
I would not have predicted that.
Me neither,
right.
but yes.
Listen, the original Candyman, which for some reason out of all of these, I forgot to look at the director and the writer, but just trust me, there is a director and a writer for both of these. The original Candyman. I saw this when I was a child. Anytime you get that Bloody Mary type, if you say someone's name into a mirror, or I still to this day won't. So the premise of this is if you say the Candyman 5 times into a mirror, the Candyman will come and kill you. And this movie took place in Chicago, in Cabrini Green. I'm from Wisconsin. And then like somehow this legend of like the Candyman turned out to be real. Like it got into into Milwaukee somehow. And nobody would say Candyman into the mirror. I feel like I've already said it too many times. I'm looking into a camera on the computer. There's a moment in this movie, I'm just going to single this out, where he's in a parking garage. Helen, the main character, is in this parking garage, and she starts hearing her name being like whispered. It's like, Helen. And she just like it's like growing and growing. And then she looks down the parking garage, and it's the Candyman just kind of like standing there, sort of walking, but he doesn't really do anything. And that visual really messed me up for a while. I had trouble going into parking garages where there wasn't anyone else. But yeah, again, a very simple premise of, if you, do something into a mirror 5 times, whatever, you're going to die. And I really like that. And that movie scared me. And it's not scary now. I'm just going to put that out there compared to, but at that time in the given moment of my life, terrifying.
I actually saw this for the first time semi-recently. I watched it before the remake came out, reboot, sequel. And I had never seen it before, yeah. And I remember I really enjoyed it, and I was surprised by how artistic it was, I guess, in its intentions. I had, growing up, I was just assumed that it was, like just another slasher movie, and it feels like a little bit more than that.
Yeah. Did you find it scary?
It's a little dated, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. There were definitely some scenes that got under my skin a little bit, but for instance, the scene in the parking garage that didn't scare me. I thought that felt a little dated, but I could see why that would scare a young Josh Hallman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for the record, the writer was Bernard Rose, who also directed, but it was based off of a book called The Forbidden by Clive Barker.
By Clive Barker. Okay.
So anyway, Tasha.
Clive Barker. Yeah.
What? You know Clive Barker?
Because he's a very well-known horror writer. And earlier in my career, I tried to get a job to adapt one of his books. And he's really, really scary writer. And horror is hard to get across, I feel like, in books. And he's one who manages.
Wow.
Okay, number 2 for me is The Others, written, directed, scored, interestingly, by Alejandro Amenabar. Stars Nicole Kidman. Came out in 2001. Love this fucking movie so much. Basic plot, it's set in 1945. It follows this woman and her 2 young children who are photosensitive, meaning they are like hurt by light. They live on the Channel Island of Jersey, and they start experiencing these really strange supernatural phenomenon in this huge manor home that is always dark because they cannot be in light. But they start after the arrival of these 3 new kind of mysterious servants. And this is another movie I do not want to spoil, but I fucking love this movie so much. It's incredibly well directed. This premise of these photosensitive kids, I think, is fantastic because it automatically gives you an organic avenue for amazing visuals and like story language, I guess, like visual language for your horror movie, because everything has to be dark. And you can now only work with light that your characters create, and the play that you can have with that is amazing. Darkness in that sense kind of becomes its own character in the movie. And then again, I love all horror movies that are deeply rooted in character. So in this case, it's this like helicopter mom, essentially, played by Nicole Kidman, who is so overprotective of her kids that it starts to harm them. And the horror is just kind of like wrapped around that theme. I also just love how spooky the servants are. They like clearly harbor this really dark secret for the entire movie. And as an audience member, your experience of that is you're just trying to puzzle out what the hell they're here for. What do they want? What are they doing to the family? And you will never guess what it is. By the end, like, no matter how smart you are, you don't guess it. I think the scares are also amazing here. Like, if I recall, they're somewhat sort of standard operating procedure, but they're directed and acted in such a way that the tension is just incredible. And that's it. I love it.
Yeah, I feel like that movie is, in my own personal rankings, like a really underrated, I guess, because I never think of it when I'm thinking of my favorite horror movies for whatever reason. But I remember the first time I saw it, it scared the crap out of me. Basically everything you just said, it scared the crap out of me. The whole photosensitive thing is just like ingenious device, and the twist just absolutely blew my mind.
As someone who gets really scared with horror movies, this changed me in a way, because it showed me that horror movies can be sort of more spooky than they had to be like scary, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of scary parts in this, but it's like first and foremost a character movie. And especially Nicole Kidman, especially at the time, like this was a huge A-list dramatic actor who was in a horror movie. So I was like, that's very curious. I need to see that. And to be honest, I didn't realize it was a horror movie when I went to go see it. And so that was not my expectation, was to be scared. It was just more like, oh, I thought it was a thriller, and it is. But I don't know, like that changed my opinion of or my understanding, I guess, of what horror movies can be. And like, that's the version of horror that I've always been chasing. Like, if I'm going to do horror, it's going to be that version. I loved it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. We're here. We're number 1. Let's go. Let's go, Dave.
Number 1. All right. My number 1, which is very appropriate for this podcast, is Halloween.
Okay.
Which is not only my favorite horror movie ever, but one of my favorite movies ever, period.
Wow.
Came out in 1978, written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, and directed by John Carpenter. And this movie, this kind of ties back to the simplicity of The Strangers that I was talking about, like, terrifying in its simplicity. Obviously, the Halloween franchise has taken Michael Myers and his story and his mythology in a lot of directions since this original. But when this movie came out, and this is just, low budget independent film, it is just simply the story of babysitters being stalked by an insane asylum escapee in a mask on Halloween night. And it is so effective in the way that John Carpenter creates tension and suspense, and it's like pure suburban horror. Also going back to living, Tasha, as we were saying when we were talking about The Strangers, like the experience of living in a house, you know, in the suburban neighborhood. This movie takes place in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois. And it's just a small, quiet town on Halloween night. And it kind of just asks the question, like, but what if pure evil is lurking around, you know, any and every corner? And yeah, I mean, I honestly don't really know what I can say about it that hasn't been said before. I just like, I think it's terrifying, so wildly influential in the slasher genre, but so understated as a slasher because there's very little gore. You almost hardly see any blood at all. It is all about where Michael Myers is hiding, where he could be lurking in the shadows.
And was this the first time Halloween was used in a movie like this where it's like, oh, the killer can just walk among us because everyone else is dressed in masks?
That's a really good question. As far as I know, I'm not going to
Sure.
make that definitive statement, but
Let's just
as
say
far
yeah.
as I know, yeah, yes.
Yes.
But yeah, and then also this just like nostalgia-wise, this played a huge role in my childhood. Like I said, the story about going to Blockbuster and being fascinated by the VHS covers. How when I was a kid, Halloween had like 5 or 6 entries already, and I feel like they all just like have some creepy picture of Michael Myers in the mask on the cover, and something about that mask like just drew me right in. And I remember at one point when I was probably like 9 or 10, sitting my mom down and basically like giving her a TED talk on why I was mature enough to see Halloween, why she should let me see this movie. Like this was a great mission in my life to get my parents to allow me to see Halloween.
That's so cute.
And it, I mean, you know, lived up to every expectation that my young horror fascinated mind could possibly have.
Yeah.
And I watch it on Halloween every single year. So it's, you know,
I love that.
To call it a rewatchable would be an understatement. And it also has, going back to, you know, I mentioned how Scream has my favorite opening in any horror movie ever. Halloween has my favorite ending of any horror movie ever.
What's the ending?
The ending, I think the statute of limitations has run out on spoiler alerts on this one. The ending is, you know, Michael Myers is trying to strangle Jamie Lee Curtis, and Dr. Sam Loomis, Donald Pleasance, who's been hunting Michael Myers. He was Michael's doctor since Michael, as a child, killed his sister when he was, I believe, 6 on Halloween night. And then 15 years later, escapes from the insane asylum and just starts stalking these babysitters. And his doctor is looking for him the whole time. And so at the end, you know, Dr. Loomis finally realizes where Michael Myers is. He's in this house. He runs up the stairs, finds him trying to strangle Jamie Lee Curtis's character, and Dr. Loomis just shoots him like 6 times, and Michael Myers falls off of the balcony. You see a shot of him laying in the yard below, motionless. You cut back to Dr. Loomis, you know, talking with Jamie Lee Curtis for a second. He walks over to the balcony and looks over. Cut to that same shot of the yard, but it's empty. And then that just iconic score kicks in. And then you cut to a shot of Dr. Loomis just kind of like looking out into the night with this like look on his face of just like, here we go. And yeah, I get chills every time.
Yeah, it's great. I feel like around this time was when all these really great sort of iconic horror movies that inspired all the movies sort of that have come before our list happened. So like, and I'm no expert in horror movies for sure, but it feels like Michael Myers sort of set a new standard for what a serial killer in these kind of slasher movies could be. The fact that he moves so slow, has no expression, no matter how fast you run, his slow ass will get to you. And another like joy of watching these movies is that you always know he's going to win. Like, even if the person is as armed as they can possibly be, like they go into the kitchen and they get there first. So they're the ones who are able to grab the giant butcher knife. And then in their other hand, they have a hammer. It doesn't matter. The joy of the movie is going to be, how is Michael Myers still going to kill this person?
Right.
Like, that's so cool. It's like you're not even rooting for the winner, I guess. You're just kind of rooting for the scene and like what's going to happen. And I feel like that set the stage for what could be scary with serial killers, because I feel like before that it was like they're running after you and there's a lot of effort in that serial killer's face, and I don't know, there's like a mania to serial killers as well, and like that just doesn't exist in this version.
Yeah, I feel like Michael Myers in this is really almost more like a force of nature.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. He's just pure evil, and just it's. I feel like he is a symbol of like the bad things that can happen to you. Mm-hmm. That can happen, and in the original, because there's no, she's not his sister or anything like that in the original. It's just the randomness and the bad things that can happen to you at any given moment.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
I'm going in.
Go.
The Conjuring. It's my number one. It's The Conjuring.
Yeah.
I was actually shocked. Dave kind of spoiled my Conjuring. He said everything that was good about The Conjuring. That movie's just terrified me. I also saw it in a theater. I remember seeing it in the theater, and it was one of the scariest experiences. And especially, like, and Dave touched on this with Ed and Lorraine Warren, when it's based off of actual things, that always that just messes with me, because then you're just like, okay, ghosts are real, the devil's real, there's some bad shit out there, could happen to anybody, I don't want to deal with this. But and like it just, that movie is awesome. I love it for every reason. David literally said everything that I was going to say about The Conjuring, but he said it better, so I'm not going to get into more of it. But yeah, by the way, another good example, I might have actually said this, is like they tried to get out of the house in The Conjuring, but they couldn't because of, I think it was like financial restrictions or something happened where they like that. It was just such a smart movie. I love that movie.
It's so good.
That's all. My number one's The Conjuring.
Obviously.
Freaking Dave at number 4.
It's so weird, Dave. Who are you?
Yeah.
My number one is The Conjuring.
Dave.
I feel attacked. I feel like I messed up this podcast.
You should. Also agree with everything Josh and Dave already said. I will sort of add specificity to like why I was really affected by it as a horror movie, and it's the slow burn. I pitched a horror. I had a horror pitch that had James Wan attached to it, and a big part of my pitch at the very beginning was this element of who James Wan is as a director, which is his incredible slow burn. And that, to me, that kind of storytelling is just like, it's my jam. It's almost become like a joke in my writers' rooms because, of course, Tasha loves a slow burn. We have to wait to pay this off. But he does such a great job. And I think that, like, for example, I guess like how to explain the slow burn is that nothing is actually like there are versions of slow burns where nothing is happening. Like I just watched Megan, for instance, and I think it has a slow burn in the sense that the first act, not a lot happens in terms of spookiness. It's just set up to the second and third acts kind of unraveling. And that's not what James Wan does with his slow burn. A lot of stuff is happening, even though you're not seeing what the monster is, what the ghost is. But a lot of little seeds are being laid along the way that give you an unsettled sense. For example, in a lesser movie, I think like a spooky thing that might happen in the first act is that you like see the ghost fairly quickly, or you know immediately that there's a ghost in this house. But instead, in this movie, it just kind of tells you that something unsettling is happening. Something
like
unnatural.
When the dog won't go in.
Exactly. The dog acts super weird at the top, barks, refuses to come in. The family reacts like, oh, that's weird for him, but they move into the house. So you know something is weird. You just don't have any clue what that is yet. Then at one point, something that's very memorable for me is that they're moving into the house. It's a big chunk of what the movie is, so it just innately makes the movie feel very active, which is great. But the mom has bruises on her arm, like up her forearm, and she's not sure how they got there. And then, it's probably just moving, we're moving a lot of heavy boxes. But we know, the audience, that something is really off here, and we still don't know why. We don't know where the bruises are really coming from. And I think a lesser horror movie would have a ghost attack her, and you would know what the ghost looks like, and then you get bruises at the end. But there's just a creepy factor going all the way through that amps up, so that at the end, when you do finally see this monster, this ghost, you feel so rewarded because you've been building. But also what it does to the audience experience is it plays as almost an investigation or a mystery for you. You're trying to unravel what's actually happening, and then at the end you find out who the killer is kind of what the structure is. And I love that, and I think it's great. And then also everything they said.
Yep.
Yeah, so good. So good.
It's so good.
All right.
Okay, well, those are our top 5, but I want to wrap up with 2 little quick things. Movies that fucked you up, made you lose sleep. Sounds like Candyman, Jaws were 2 for Josh. And then an unexpected horror movie that you love that you maybe are embarrassed to share, or is just no one else loves it, but you happen to really love it.
Oh.
You didn't send us that question,
yeah,
did you?
Jesus.
Yeah,
Hey,
this one's a surprise.
curveball there, Tasha. All right.
I'll start with movies that fucked me up, though. Candyman is one for me. I spent later when you walk into my mom's room when I was growing up, she had her closet was just mirrors. So she had a wall of mirrors that you had to pass in order to get to the bathroom, and that was the bathroom I always used. And so for an entire year, I would close my eyes and run past that wall and then go into the bathroom, and then close my eyes, but I was in the bathroom for a whole year. So that was a big one for me.
That's it?
I actually have a similar scared to go to the bathroom story.
Yeah? Go on.
About my movie for what fucked me up. The Sixth Sense. When I saw that in theaters, I don't think I watched it again for several years because it scared me so much. And there's the scene in The Sixth Sense where he gets up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and he walks past the kitchen, and there's the woman in a bathrobe with her back to us, and we think that it's his mom, but then she turns around and it's not his mom, and it's it's the ghost of an abused woman, I think, and she holds out her wrists, and her wrists have been cut, and she kind of runs right at the camera, and that disturbed and scared the absolute shit out of me. And when I saw the movie, my bedroom at home we had a finished basement, and my bedroom was in the basement.
Yeah.
But then if I ever had to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would have to go upstairs because there was no bathroom down there. And our stairs would, you'd get to the top of the stairs and you'd step into the kitchen. And where how you would step into the kitchen is almost exactly like the shot of The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
I could step in, and if there was a woman in a bathrobe at the sink, her back would be to me, just like she is in the movie.
Yeah.
And so I feel for a couple of years, if I woke up and had to pee in the middle of the night, I would hold it, and I would not, just on the off chance that I was going to see that woman from The Sixth Sense in our kitchen.
100%. Fair.
I've got 3.
Okay.
The original Hills Have Eyes, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Funny People.
Oh, Funny People's disturbing.
I don't know that movie.
I don't know if that's a horror film. That movie's fucking nuts. I just I can't even think about that movie. I don't even know why I brought it up.
All right, I have a second one, then we can move on to unexpected horror movies. Nightmare on Elm Street really, really fucked me up for a very, 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 very long time because you can't escape that motherfucker, Freddy. And then at one point I remember, bless my mom, she tried to help me by showing me a picture of the actor who plays him. It's see, he's not real. I'm this only proves that he is real. You cannot talk me out of this. So that was another one. Fucked me up.
Nightmare on Elm Street, I'll just say, was one of my in strong competitions for number 5. That's
fair.
Yeah. I'll also hopefully I have a 7-month-old daughter, and I'm trying to slowly expose her baby brain to horror things. And I'll show you guys. I have this like little plush Freddy Krueger doll
my God,
in my
it's
office.
so scary.
Jesus Christ.
Like this, I've had this for years. This is just like a little decoration piece in my office. But the other day, Sophie was in here and she saw it and she reached out for it.
Whoa.
And so Joanna gave it to her, and then Sophie was just like holding Freddy and playing with him. And then like it was nap time and she like wanted to take him into the crib with her to nap. And I got her to sleep, and then I was like, I think maybe I'm going to take this out now because, you know, Freddy haunts your dreams. So I don't think he should be in the crib. But
it's like a really proud moment for you as a father.
Oh yes, so proud.
Tasha, I can't think of a movie. I gotta think about the one that I'm like embarrassed to like.
Same.
I might help you with what mine is.
Oh.
Human Centipede.
Oh, for God's sake. I can't even watch that movie. There's no world in which I'm watching Human Centipede.
We just really learned something about Tasha.
Yeah.
It's disgusting. It's all the things that make it terrible. But the villain is so good in this movie.
I can't believe you came in about Saw. You're talking about not liking Saw. And now you just threw out the Human Centipede.
I think the taboo nature of it is what attracted me to it. And so I watched it, and it turns out like it's a good character movie. So that's my unexpected one.
I guess I kind of think I have one. Kind of like Leprechaun.
That is a great one.
Yeah.
It's considered one of the worst movies of all time.
I think I kind of like that movie.
That's a great one.
Fantastic in-depth analysis.
Yeah. Dave?
Can I do the opposite and talk about a classic that I actually have issues with?
Sure.
Is that not as fun?
No, that's fine. What is a classic movie that you hate that everyone else loves?
Maybe this isn't going to work because I don't actually hate it.
Listen, we can do a follow-up. We'll do next episode. We'll say what Dave's answer is.
This Week in Writing. Dave's answer is...
I'm just totally drawing a blank.
Leprechaun 2, dude.
Yeah, Leprechaun 2. The opposite version was going to be The Shining.
Oh, interesting choice.
I recognize that movie as, you know, a classic, and it is like obviously a masterclass in filmmaking, but The Shining is my favorite novel of all time. Stephen King is like the reason that I became a writer, and The Shining specifically is my favorite book ever. And the movie The Shining just absolutely rips the heart out of the novel, out of the story. And like the movie's so cold, and like it's scary, but it's cold and like almost like anti-emotional. Whereas
it is, yeah.
Whereas the novel like makes you cry. So I've always had like a strained relationship with the Stanley Kubrick version of The Shining.
I think that's a good unexpected horror movie. Yeah. Last mention.
You don't have to say that, but thank you.
I think it is.
Okay.
And I think we did a really great job today, guys.
Me too.
I think we killed it.
I hope so.
It makes me so pumped to just go watch some horror movies right now.
Hell yeah.
All right. Quote of the day. There's no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. Alfred Hitchcock. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or on Twitter at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram. Dave?
On Twitter, X, it's at D_Lev24. And on Instagram, I'm at Dave_Levinson7.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.